Don't forget you can join the Everydayer Club to get the ad-free version of the show at lockedonjayhawks.supercast.com. That is lockedonjayhawks.supercast.com. Let's get to our tight end room preview for KU football. So I think when you look at the projected depth chart, Carson Brune is your number one, and then it is a bunch of like slashes. Leighton Cure or Jalen Butler or Carter Moses. And I think it's really those three guys competing for really two spots, but that main one up top, and I'll get to why in a second here. But and then you have two other freshmen kind of behind it, which we'll get to here in a second, and obviously some good recruits coming in as well for the class of 2027 behind that also. But it's interesting for a couple reasons with the depth chart. One, we know Kansas will play a lot of two tight end sets. So realistically, if you're the second tight end, you become like a quasi starter, and that's where that competition between those three guys, Cure, Moses, and Butler, becomes interesting, because if you assume Brune's one of those two, then okay, who's that other guy that's basically another starter? But we also know KU will play some three tight end sets. It won't be as often as two tight end sets. So it still becomes important to be, can you be the third tight end? And then if you're the fourth tight end, you're going to be used sparingly. You're pretty much, every so often they might use a fourth tight end in a goal line package or something, or if maybe somebody's hurt, you'll move up to those top three. But realistically, getting into that top three is huge. Getting in the top two is even bigger. And it's also interesting because when I look at, like Mason Fairchild has been probably the poster child. And honestly, like KU got really good tight end production this past year too, like Deshaun Hanukkah and then Bowden Grown once Hanukkah was hurt. But it's interesting because KU's top tight end in those situations has been their top receiving tight end basically too, right? Like Mason Fairchild was KU's top receiving tight end, and he was their top tight end. Same goes for Deshaun Hanukkah till he was hurt, and then it was Bowden Grown. And with Carson Brune, the interesting part is he's KU's top tight end, but I think he's a better blocker than he is a receiver. And so how does that kind of potentially impact things? And then furthermore, with Andy Kotelnicki back in the offense, does somebody play the Jared Casey role? Because the Jared Casey tight end role was sometimes play a traditional tight end, other times motion, other times be an H-back, other times be a fullback. It was kind of that do a little bit of everything. Would that be Carson Brune's role? Because Bruhn is a better run blocker than he is a receiver. So does it make sense to have him do that? Where, Jared Casey was used as a receiver sometimes. He had really good hands, but he wasn't this big downfield threat necessarily, right? And with Bruhn, that's kind of the case as well. So do we see Bruhn in the Jared Casey role on steroids? And then if that happens, who becomes the top tight end on the outside? Is it more of a receiving tight end, right? And if it's more of a receiving tight end, that's where those other guys come into play as well. And it's interesting because they all, with Butler, he's probably the most speediest, the most athletic of the bunch. When you look at Leighton Cure, he's the most experienced. He's been in the room for 3 years. When you look at Carter Moses, he's maybe just the most solid and has the most proven production, even though it was at the FCS level of the bunch. So I think it's going to be a really interesting bunch and how they use everybody and who gets kind of fit into what role. Or do we see Leighton Cure in the Jared Casey role and Carson Brune takes another step as a receiver? I think all those are going to be interesting. And furthermore, on Carson Brune, like he was pretty good as a redshirt freshman. What is the redshirt sophomore season going to look like? Obviously, he had an injury. Is that going to stunt any of the momentum he had going for himself? Or like, is he going to be the same player he was last year, where it's still a useful player, a player who's getting a lot of snaps, starting games for you, is a good player? Or can he take a step from being a good player into being like an all Big 12 player? Like that's a question too, right? Now, when we look at the stats from the tight ends year over year, versus who was calling plays. So I don't know. I kind of want to just throw out 2021, like that, just wasn't a very good Kansas team, but it was the really year zero for the staff. They joined so late. So like it's not really instructional to look at 2021. So if we look at the 2 years of Kotelnicki, 2022 and 2023, the tight ends between those 2 years averaged 50 catches and a little over about 650, 680 yards per game receiving, and averaged, 8.5 touchdowns per season. So 50 catches for like 650 and 8 touchdowns, basically the average between the two Kotelnicki years for all tight ends combined. You go to the Jeff Grimes year and they drop down 31 catches for 391, 2 touchdowns. Now, part of it too, Kotelnicki had Mason Fairchild, which Grimes did not, but certainly that's a big drop in production. Then you go back to Zabrowski, who's getting the tight ends involved a lot more. And obviously it helps to have a bunch of productive ones like Deshaun Hanika and Bowden Grown. 55 catches, 665, and 9 touchdowns. So honestly, I think the production will be kind of similar to what it was last year when you look at it. But, I think is this group better than they were a season ago? That I'm not 100%. Now, I do think the caveat there is they could be because of just health. Like, in theory, I think Deshaun Hanika would be if you're comparing the 25 group to the 26 group, healthy Deshaun Hanika would be the best tight end among those two groups. Healthy Bowden Groon might be the number 2 tight end when healthy among those two groups, right? So I think last year's tight end group better, but we know the tight end group had to deal with injuries. And so if this tight end group stays healthier, you could theoretically get better production just because the guys you have are on the field more often, if that kind of makes sense. My guy for the tight end group, I'm not going to stray too far from the beaten path. It's really hard to find Carter Moses like film and highlights and stuff. So I would like to say that I'm a Carter Moses guy. It's just, I can't do it from the standpoint of just I haven't seen enough out there just in terms of video to be like, yes, I'm all about this guy. I want to be about him, but I don't totally know. So I want to get there, but yeah, it's just got to be Carson Brune. And I was going over a film review of Bruhn, which we'll get to at some point here, but just really impressed with his blocking ability. And he is kind of a Jared Casey style receiver where he's not the most explosive, like route runner, downfield player, but like he's going to catch a lot of passes his way. So yeah, but Bruhn would be my guy. Now, who's the future becomes a really interesting question too. I mean, technically Bruhn is the now and the future. He's still just a redshirt sophomore, but it'll be really interesting, the battle of Jack Oots versus Kevin Sullivan, not necessarily for playing time this year, but those are 2 freshmen you have coming in Oots and Sullivan, who are going to be competing for the basically 5th tight end role, which again, isn't really getting you on the field, but here's what it is doing. It's setting yourself up to get real playing time in 2027, because as we look to that tight end room, 3 of those guys we've mentioned with Cure, Moses, and Butler are all 5th-year seniors. So it's not just that they're seniors, it's that even if the 5-5 happens, they're gone, which opens up all sorts of playing time next year. So whoever wins that battle between Oots and Sullivan is set up for real playing time in 2027. Obviously, it's not going to be easy competing with some of the freshmen they have coming in too, because I love both of KU's tight end commits they have in 2027, notably Mason Oglesby, who is essentially a 4-star recruit, depending where you look. He could get in. So really bright future of this tight end room as well when you look at 2027 and beyond. But overall, tight ends are going to be important, be a safety blanket for whoever quarterback is throwing in the football. But, the beauty of going off what we talked about at the beginning of the show, kind of, can they be better running the football this year? Well, your best tight end is a good blocker in Carson Brune, and I think it's going to help with that if you're KU. And so even though there might be less receiving juice from Carson Brune than you had from Deshaun Hanika or Bowden Grown, there's more blocking there, right? Which might fit the identity of what this team is going for. All right. Landon Watson, KU linebacker, is no longer eligible. We'll get to that, how it affects KU next. Don't forget you can join the Everydayer Club at lockedonjayhawks.supercast.com. That is lockedonjayhawks.supercast.com. Okay, so Landon Watson, who was a transfer into the program, linebacker, is no longer eligible. I guess he just never had his appeal or whatever. This was sent out by Henry Greenstein on, Thursday afternoon. Linebacker Landon Watson, who joined KU from Kentucky in the spring, had his appeal for a 6th year of eligibility denied and will no longer be on the Jayhawks roster this season. So certainly stinks for him. I don't know if he's been like practicing in spring ball and now he's just like pack up his stuff. Like, I don't know if you can like get him on as a GA or something. He's looking for professional football opportunities. So maybe he can get an opportunity there or something, or find something that obviously stinks for him. And I don't know. I guess the argument here goes over. So he started his career at TCU at a high school. He was like a 4-star recruit, goes to TCU for 2 years, bounced to Marshall for 2. Then he goes to Kentucky for 2025. So in theory, that was 5 years. But here's why there was a thought that he could get an extra year. So he redshirted one of the years at TCU. So now you're looking at, okay, but there's still 4 other years. He had another year that he was trying to get a medical redshirt at TCU where he had like a signed thing from Gary Patterson, the head coach, and doctor stuff. But I don't know, maybe the NCAA viewed it as like, hey, you took the red shirt for already or something, so you couldn't take it again. I don't know, just weird, the inconsistencies with the NCAA. And you would think that like taking a medical red shirt would be one of those things that they'd have more understanding for, and why do they in certain cases but not in others? I don't know. Feels like a very incongruent thing. So it is unfortunate, but he's somebody who, wasn't necessarily expected to come in and be a starter or anything, but I think realistically was competing to try to be on the 2 deep here. Like Trey Lathan, your returning starter, stud on the defensive end, like he's one of your starters. And then it's kind of open competition for, well, first of all, are you going to start two linebackers, or are you going to start 3, right? And I think Davion Crouch, Quincy Davis, Jabril Alameen, even Landon Watson, probably all in that competition. Realistically, seems like Bam Crouch and Quincy Davis probably at the top of that, maybe Jabril Alameen. But realistically, Watson was going to provide linebacker depth, and he was probably going to be a key special teams player for you, right? And would give you veteran leadership in a linebacker room that does have a lot of young players behind it, with freshmen coming in and Joseph Credit and Josh Galbraith and a redshirt freshman and Malachi Curvey. Good to have senior leadership, and you still do. Jerron Willis, Jabril Alameen, Davion Crouch, Trey Lathan are all redshirt seniors. Even Quincy Davis, kind of the young guy in the room, he's still a redshirt senior, where he's been in school for 4 years. So it still is an older group, but obviously you hate to lose anybody else. The good news for KU is this is a position where, because like all those names I mentioned, like, if Trey Lathan and Bam Crouch or Quincy Davis are your starters, I feel solid about the linebacking core. And Jabril Alameen's kind of somebody who could play, like, if you want to play more of a hawk type linebacker, he would make sense there. Curvey seems to have a very bright future. And you still have a redshirt senior who can play special teams for you and give you depth in Jerron Willis. And then I do like those 2 freshman incoming linebackers in Credit and Galbraith. So I still do feel good about the linebacker room for KU. But like I said, you hate to be losing anybody at any point in time. So unfortunate for Watson, for sure. Okay, our trivia question of the day. We're done with our trivia event, so thank you to everybody who came out for that. You can still donate to the Rock Chalk Roundball Classic, rockchalkroundballclassic.com, but we're going to continue on with our trivia questions. They're fun. Yesterday's question was, Sasha Khan went a perfect 6 for 6 to help Kansas win a game against what opponent in the 2008 NCAA tournament? The correct answer, Davidson. Here is today's question, going with our KU Football Friday theme. We ask a football question. The KU record for most individual rushing attempts of 58 in one game, run attempts in 1/2 of 34, and 1/4, 19 rushing attempts. All of those came in the same game by what KU tailback? So again, the KU record for most runs in a game, runs in a half, and runs in a quarter all came in the same game by what KU tailback? All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. Don't forget to check out our KU baseball versus Oklahoma Super Regional preview as well. See you next time on LOJ.